Hi folks, just a little notice that after next week's episode, we'll be taking a 2-week break and resuming in the new year. You're listening to the Adventuring Party for the 3rd week of December 2022. This week, another round of commandments on how you can make your game a little more old school. Get your players thinking about rocks. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and rated gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm OSR Destroyer Scar.
And I'm Dave. OSR both somewhat like her.
Neutral, eh? We'll get to you soon enough. Well, yes, we're here once again to look into
the Principia Apocrypha.
Yeah, the Principia Apocrypha, which I don't know if it claims itself to be the Bible of the OSR, but I know a lot of people will claim in its stead that it is the Bible of the OSR. We've run through the first section of this set of rules, where we've talked about being impartial and rulings over rules and all that sort of stuff. And generally, things are positive. It still needs to be destroyed as an abomination against all that is gaming, but we can leave that off and appreciate it for its good works. So, do we want to start into the second section of this?
Yes, we do. And the second section is titled Get Them Thinking. Okay, right, getting players to think can be a bit of a challenge at times, or it could be a challenge to stop them.
Yeah, it's one of those things where clearly the OSR is ascribing to the concept that the juice of gaming is engagement.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
And it's very concerned about, we can call it brainless play, where, you just, I have plus 27 to hit and plus 13 to damage, so I just sort of walk forward waving my arms, and if they die, it's their fault.
Yeah, that even describing that sounds pretty dull, to be honest. So the Principia. First in this section is XP for discovery and adversity.
Now, this is sort of a bit of a counterpoint to a recent episode we released, where we suggested part of the issue with the existing reward structures in games is that people don't necessarily... Some people definitely do like the gradual accumulation of points to build up to milestones of levels, or additional stat points, or what have you. And we sort of described things as where that's sort of going away a little, but you don't need to take this idea literally word for word, where it's like character progression has to be tied to a thing. But I definitely do see the argument here for what we would call rewards for discovery, where like by rewarding the act of discovery and facing adversity, then the game's realized. So the point is that the reward is in putting oneself out there, putting your character out into the, for what word, active play space of where there are things to discover and things that are going to be rather adverse.
Yeah, where the heroes can test their mettle and see are they in fact the stuff of legends. Yeah,
and it sort of describes this idea that rather than having to have an overall arching narrative of you're all forgotten princelings in the same abandoned orphanage, and it all burns down, and then you defeat the Dark Lord. It's going that the stuff you get up to when you're directly when you're directly incentivized to go out there, put yourself on the line, and find something cool is, in their eyes, a better...
Well, they describe XP for treasure is like the fuel of the game's engines. It's giving an incentive for players to do stuff besides just kill things. Because if you're getting the XP getting your character to grow mechanically, like for getting treasure, which is also rather helpful, you're going to start thinking creative. You're going to start thinking, how can I get treasure out? And that isn't necessarily the same thing as I wade into combat, with my plus whatever sword, although it can be, absolutely. Yeah, like I can see where this fits into the earlier bits in the Principia about this sort of thing.
I think the whole XP for treasure thing has been one of the most misunderstood elements of early D&D likes. In that it was sort of, it never explicitly said this, but it was sort of substituting for what was actually the strength of the systems was discovery and, risk. And if you do X, you will get tangible rewards. And so to make them as tangible as possible, because you can't really pay for your breakfast in the morning with discovery. They actualize it as treasure, therefore cut the middleman between, an abstract concept like discovering things, fiddling with cool things. No, we turned it into, if you sneak past the goblins and interfere with the altar of dementia, you will get filthy lucre, and that will correspond into levels.
Yep.
It's an ingenious substitution of, the abstract for the tangible, but it was never really drilled into the rapidly expanding audience of D&D that this was the goal. The game decided logic behind it was never actualized to people, and so inevitably so many people went, this is stupid. Why am I getting double rewards for money? We should just focus entirely on combat, because that makes sense. You get better when you're exercising or something. Thus, what OSR people call the Great Decline began.
To be fair, I recall running into the idea of XP for treasure and thinking it was silly, because the logic behind it was not laid out, and it didn't occur to me originally.
Yeah, and that's why you get documents like this, which are trying to sort of backfill in all the stuff that, as we saw, people like Gary Gygax and, was it Mike Carr who did Basic Edition? Or Holmes? No, it was Holmes. Dr. Holmes, Eric Holmes first, then Menser was the real Basic D&D. And I've probably already pissed off all the OSR fans. So let's move a little bit on to the sort of the other side of the classic rulings versus rules thing for DMs, which is player ingenuity over character ability. And this is sort of the trend in OSR products to stick with very basic abilities for a character and sort of substitute that with open rule systems that allow people to go, well, we have these planks, let's build a bridge. Or, you're not supposed to turn troll entrails into rope, but I think we could spend a couple of weeks figuring it out. And such forth and such like, which again is more of this juice of, rather than just saying, oh, well, I got level 3, here's my smiting ability, I just smite everything from now on. It's like, so I can't smite things, but I do have this dynamite. It's very unstable.
Yeah, as they're pointing out in this section, it's pointed out that old school PCs were very minimalistic. The character sheet, the idea seems to be that the character sheet is mostly there for when the players make a mistake, as in it's a fallback, and I actually quite like that as an idea.
The idea that armor class and saving throws and hit points are sort of your backup when things go a little awry.
Yeah. So a funny thing happened across the years where, we had a great session, it was mostly just role playing, and this is generally generally sessions which weren't chock full of combat. And to be fair, a lot of my early gaming experiences had to do with fairly crunchy systems which were not shy about throwing characters into combat, like D&D 3rd Ed.
Growing up in this late 2nd Ed and 3rd Ed things, you learn a different way of looking at rules, and gives you a bit of a survivor's complex.
A little bit.
Well, first off, people, the audience may be screaming at things. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Characters in old games had loads of things. Just look at wizards. And there's an awful lot of... I'll just explain to the people that there's an awful lot of games in the OSR mold, particularly the new OSRs, it's sometimes called, where there are no wizards or even character classes of that thing. Or if they are, they're very much differently interpreted.
I mean, I can think of a number of games where there's either no character classes or they're optional.
One of the big ones I think of is Electric Bastion Land, the sort of sequel or slash expansion to Into the Odd, which I reviewed many a moon ago when I first showed up on the podcast. It is very much the idea that, players can get spells, but these are items in their inventory that they have to figure out how to use successfully. You might start with them, but they're not in your brain or anything. They're just additional tools, the same as your spellbook of illusion magic is basically the same as your iron spikes and your 10 feet of rope.
Yeah, I mean, they're a limited resource.
Yeah. And of course, in the modern day when we have so many cantrips and spells, people forget that a starter wizard would often have 1 to 3 spells for the first few levels, and then their general usefulness after they use their one spell in the dungeon was to stand behind their hired henchmen and just kind of chuck lawn darts and alchemist fire over their heads at anything that was threatening their 2 hit points.
Those lawn darts and alchemist fire were no joke, though.
Oh, absolutely. Back in the times when, before damage figures had imploded, where, your master demon from the pits of hell might have only 30 hit points. So it was no joke for them to get being set on fire a bit. Like, the thing about OSR and explaining why this works back in, basic D&D but doesn't work today, it's a complicated thing. That's why there's an industry of blogs explaining it all. I think we might have gotten a little bit off topic.
A little bit.
Yes, I generally find the sort of emphasis on player ingenuity noble, but I generally do think that while saying yes and is a good idea a lot of the time, a lot of the reason why we have more complicated modern RPG systems is because a lot of GMs don't have that same confidence of, are they actually being ingenious, or are they just sort of being very convincing to me? And they would rather that there be a bit of objectivity from the rule system rather than the subjectivity of the GM there. To a certain extent, having an objective system external to the GM can offload subjective matters from the GM to a system, and that could feel calming.
It has its uses, and it can take cognitive load off GM and player. It does give players some things they know their characters can do. But the general principle, that segues quite neatly into this: cleverness rewarded, not thwarted.
Yeah, this is sort of the say yes first mentality.
Personally, I think there's a distinction to be drawn here between rewarded and given everything they want on a plate.
I think one of the best pieces of OSR advice, which I don't think is actually in this book, but one of the best pieces of advice is to give them the sun and make them fight to the death for the moon. You should give players almost everything they want, and that will get them engaged for that last little bit.
Yeah, I quite like that line, actually. Never heard it.
I believe it was on the Goblin Punch blog, has various lists of OSR advice, which I think should be checked out. It's an awful lot of it is crazy, but it's the kind of crazy that might just might work. But yes, I think that's one of the... This is sort of... This cleverness rewarded section is a very important bit to put beside the ingenuity section, because it reveals sort of the cliches of the bad DMing that sort of undermined a lot of this early gameplay. GM saying no a lot is because there was no objective rule for a thing, so they just defaulted to no. Whereas this new advice is saying that, well, if there's no objective rule, you should probably default to yes. Maybe a yes but or a yes and.
What's more positive atmosphere, just off the top of my head, it could be quite enjoyable to hash out how a yes is going to work. Although that does lead into ask them how they do it, because this also helps the GM pick out, well, is this actually plausible, or are they just chancing their arm?
Yeah, that's a fair point. This is one of those things where I think this is an important piece. Whether you believe it or not is also going to be important, because it breaks into the thing of that the players are meant to engage with the world in front of them. This could be a problem. Is like they're asking you, and they want to avoid making their 20% trap finding role. Instead, they have an elaborate set of hooks and crowbars to try to lever the door open. It behooves the GM to have properly described the actual lock that they're trying to jimmy apart. I'd say there's two things here, but these are probably more general table management than specifically to OSR. Is that beware the person who maybe uses the "how do I do it" thing to launch into the soliloquy, as opposed to the person who's like, I don't really want to describe how I get through this door. I want to get to the other side of the door. So a principle like this just does require the GM to you're not turning off your GM hat of seeing what the players are interested in. You're asking them to engage. You have to make sure that the things are engaging, and also you're doing the usual stuff of balancing table time and such. The other thing is, this is if you're maybe not a fully on board GM. This may be a bit where a bad GM might think, I have to ask them how they do it so that I can catch them out and figure out how they're doing wrong. And you should probably refer back to previous things where you're supposed to reward ingenuity and not punish it. Any other thoughts on that? Or
no, I think that's fairly well covered.
Next up, and I think this is probably one of the cooler aspects of the thing, is the idea of let them manipulate the world. This is where you sort of say that the OSR is probably not a good place for the frustrated novelist GM.
Oh no.
Who would like you to see, look at these wonderful NPCs and all this amazing world building. When the player starts setting it all on fire, they go, no, my creation. Whereas an OSR GM is sort of subtly implied to, you should be letting them break things. And, probably get themselves killed in the process, but the point is that they're doing something interesting. Setting things on fire is inherently interesting. You can quote me on that. So, this is, I think, an interesting piece of advice with a bit of depth to it.
It does require the GM to provide sufficient detail that, the players are going to have things to manipulate, to interact with, to engage with. If you can't just, say, you're in a forest. You have to say something about what are the trees like, can you see the sky, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah. Are any of these trees rotten and able to be pushed over on top of the goblins? These are relevant things. But yes, these little details is just like, this is probably where, rather than setting in stone, having people suggest, there probably are some thieves that are not part of the Thieves Guild in the city this big, and just like, you could probably go with that and be ready to spin out an entire faction for your game. Definitely, I would say you want to avoid the tourney of meta plot. I think this is one of the reasons why Greyhawk, once the big classic setting of Second Ed, really lost a lot of popularity in the 80s when they started putting out more White Wolf style, big damn story modules. Like where Vecna returns and kills all the wizards, or Ius invades the north and such forth. And people sort of was like, no, that's not my Greyhawk anymore.
Good items are unique tools.
This is part of the answer's not in your character sheet, it's in your inventory, which we've done an episode on that. We've done 2 episodes on that. We will not go back over that again.
Yeah, I remember them.
But it does put out the point is that a treasure or a thing that does something unique or specific is not bad. You don't want something that's a solution to everything, but things that could give you weird and interesting options. They don't have to be magic. They could be very particularly odd weapons like extremely long spears or a crowbar with an extra prong on the back for, I don't know, attaching scented candles. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. But just stuff that has a bit of an oddity to it is valuable stuff for the players to take a peek at and try something new with.
Yeah, on a slightly more abstract level, an interesting item that isn't just, that is a little bit different and unique. It's more memorable, and people are going to be more interested in engaging with such a thing. Because if it's just, a bog standard item, whatever, it's like 1,000 others. This, a rope that can become rigid as steel in command, and there's one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'll remember that, like.
I also like the idea of the third point, which is don't let a magic item become a do everything superpower, but give it a downside or an interesting cost. I like that thing because we see of ominous tales of we'll eventually get into it in the Tome of Gygax episodes, but so many pointlessly cursed items in the treasure tables. Whereas actually being interesting would be an item that has a big upside, but also has a big downside. I think that's how cursed items should be done. Something that doesn't, just, oh, you touched it, you explode. I do recall one particularly interesting thing. The ring in the bottom of White Plume Mountain, the sequel, was a ring of petrification. You just point your finger at someone and they would save or die as they were petrified.
Well, that's handy.
But every time you used it, there was an increasing 1% chance that it would affect you as well.
Ah.
And the party wizard took that, and they got up to, I think, about 14 or 15% on it before, while they were fighting in the middle of a lake in a whirlpool. It's just like, I don't like that other halfling wizard. Petrify, other petrify. Both poor halfling wizards just fell into the whirlpool and were never seen again.
Oh well. And that leads somewhat hilariously to the last point and get them thinking, which is don't mind the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Metagaming, dissonance. This is one I might have had a bit of trouble with some time ago myself, because I was keeping I generally try to keep a fairly large wall between what players know, what characters know. Again, the legacy of systems like Third Ed, as you know yourself. Yeah, I'm kind of coming around to the idea of not having such a stringent line, as in if players know that trolls are dangerous things that are vulnerable to acid or fire, well, players know that and can act accordingly.
Yeah. I think the classic example is the fighter that has 3 intelligence but still figures out how to unlock the puzzle door. Like that's sort of supposed to be fine in an OSR system. I had a thought about this because I was just like, this is one of those things that sounds like it might be good or terrible, but I realize what's happening here is because we've done all these other points, we see that one of the most important things in this setup is engagement. Like that you're getting your hands dirty in the world. You're manipulating the world. You are using your tools. You are telling people how you do it. You're getting reward for your cleverness, and you're getting XP for putting yourself in risks that no sane human would ever, sane human or dwarf or elf would ever subject themselves to. So there's this very big emphasis on engagement, and I think that means that the stuff that we usually worry about when we're worrying about metagaming or dissonance, immersion is not the actual goal here. That an OSR game is far more worried about the players being engaged than that they are, living in their characters. Oh, my character would never do this. My third elf has died to this basilisk. This is so unsatisfying. It's like, no, it's about the engagement of solving the problem, overcoming the task, manipulating this and that, being in the moment as yourself far more than your character. And this, I think, is sort of the value shift, as it were, between pure OSR versus more modern or story-based gaming.
Yeah, I think that's a fair description. And that concludes Get Them Thinking. The next section is Build Rocks and Hard Places.
This is a section saying there's like, well, why do characters die by the train load in these things? It's because, again, we're trying to develop this element of engagement. It's trying to get it to the, I have to apply my brain to this to figure out a way through it. The first set of sub-advice here is to offer tough choices. Put in risks and rewards, stuff like resource management, things to worry about. It's like, are you going to risk running out of food to get to the next town, or are you going to slink back to safety, or are you going to spend longer in the dungeon?
Well, it does reward preparation. clever use of resources, and well-chosen risks.
I would say there's one thing that people might worry about here is don't railroad in tough choices where they don't make sense. This is possibly why it's sort of put into systemized ways. Resource management, hit point management, retreating mechanics, travel mechanics. There's a sort of emphasis in a lot of OSR circles to have simply present the situation and have the players react to the risks and rewards involved, rather than just say, oh, you got to level 3, well that means every 5 steps you go there's 1,000 gold pieces, but your mother dies. You shouldn't be forcing in tough choices. And I think going back to the previous section, you should not be poo-pooing any alternate things where people reject their choice and find their third path. You don't demand tough choices or inflict tough choices. Offer tough choices. I think that's an important distinction there.
Well, Ogre Hill is just over there. Like, you don't have to go to it. Like, you don't, but even though it's covered with ogres with a reputation for, stacking the skulls of their enemies.
But underneath those skulls,
yeah, they probably have quite a bit of filthy lucre, just there.
Tough choices there. No need to go. And if you could figure out a way past the ogres, all that treasure could be yours.
Who would have known they would tunnel under the hill and come up in the ogre's camp?
Who could have thought? Here's possibly a bit more of a controversial one. And this is subvert their expectations. And this, I think, is possibly one of those traps where someone who's going back into old school gaming might very much assume that they're going back to quote-unquote classic play where, orcs are all evil, wizards are all mad, and you can always rely on a paladin. But these OSR aficionados, they put forward the idea that you should probably take out your pop culture fantasy elements, the sort of stuff that Lord of the Rings and Dragonlance made mainstream, and start twisting everything. Goblins are fairies. Dragons are gigantic crocodiles. The most evil man in the village is actually just sort of the guy who operates the well. Idea that doing the usual is sort of undermining the work because you're not trying to emulate what actually happened in older games run by Gygax and such, but rather you're trying to emulate the creative spirit that they did. And what they did was eventually came up with evil orcs, dragons, etc., etc.
You don't want to emulate the trapping. It's actually a parallel to that crunchy era of just falling back on mechanics. Instead, this is falling back on player knowledge, but a body of player knowledge that shouldn't be so set in stone, because that would just make it boring.
Yeah, it's just like putting that again. It's going back to the point that discovery is the most important way to get engagement. It's like, oh, goblins don't work anything like what they have in any of the other books I've read. Oh, I should probably pay closer attention to them, is the idea. The issue there is that some people will go into the OSR looking for that old school consistency, the sort of live in the cliches. And if they see instead of a whole bunch of stuff they consider to be random nonsense, they can be very easily turned off. But the OSR aficionados here would say that that's fine. I don't know. This one I think is a bit more of a sprinkle to taste.
Yeah, I could see it going wrong, because if everything's random, then then your actions don't really matter.
And yeah, if you are building up your sort of classic adventure modules for your players, you should probably figure out, do they actually want to go through the classics, or do they want big novelty, maximum OSR nonsense? The next two are sort of linked, which are build challenges with multiple answers and with no answer. This is sort of the idea of when you're putting together your tricks and traps in your scenario, that you don't make a correct solution. And this is, again, possibly the anti-third ed element, where the solution was cast all your buff spells, charge in, destroy everything, rest for 8 hours, repeat.
That's not even the worst example I could think of. I could think of, and con games can be a little bad for this, where there is one solution the GM has in mind, and that's it. If you deviate from the solution they have in mind, you're not succeeding, and that's it. There's no yes and, there's no buts, that's it. And that is a frustrating experience for players.
But yes, it just says make sure that there's no choke points to progress. Like, again, design your dungeons with multiple ways around things. Make sure, like, they always have the option to go off the beaten path and try to cut cross country through, the ogre hells and such. But also, sometimes just make challenges with no answer and let players suggest answers to them with what they have. It's just like, it's a bit of a tricky one, but if you can pull it off, I think you can come up with something interesting. And I think that is part of the point here, is that you're not here to execute a procedure. Procedures are meant to be just like DM tools here to just get yourself through odd bits and meet out challenges in a fair way. But the act of, rote, just churning through a dungeon is what you're not supposed to. Each room, whether it be full of monsters, traps, water, exploding wine, or whatever, is meant to be a challenge that the players are to look at and try to figure out. And maybe some of those challenges are actually solutions to other challenges.
Alright, we've not yet finished the Principia, but another day, another challenge.
I think we got another one of these in us, but yes, this has been another grand look into the mindset beside the OSR, and what, after decades now, I'm pretty sure the first OSR supplements are north of 15 years old at this point, so it's hardly say that this is the bright new challenger in the RPG space. This stuff has been chewed on by many an intellectual over many social media platform
and forum.
Yeah. You know what? The death of Twitter may in fact create another wave of blogs for which to vomit forth wisdom on this stuff. But we'll have to see.
Right. And on that note, this party is over.
Thanks for listening to the Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike from version 3 license.